Imagine you were creating a perfect world. No suffering, no death, no violence, no fear, just peace. Now imagine that right in the middle of that perfect world, you place a single tree, and then you tell the only two people living there, don't eat from that one. Why? If God never wanted Adam and Eve to eat from the tree, why put it there at all? For thousands of years, people have wrestled with that question. And the strange part is that Genesis never gives a direct answer. In fact, the more closely you read the story, the stranger it becomes. Because the forbidden tree was not hidden, it was not locked away. It was not placed on the other side of the world. According to Genesis, it was right there in the garden, visible, accessible, almost as if it was meant to be encountered. So what exactly was the tree? And why did it matter so much? Let's go back to the beginning. Genesis describes Eden as a paradise, a garden filled with life, rivers flowing through the land, and trees producing every kind of fruit. And among all those trees, two are singled out by name: the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. One is connected with life. The other becomes the center of humanity's first great choice. And that is where the mystery begins. Because the story spends almost no time describing the fruit itself. It does not tell us its color, its shape, or what it tasted like. Instead, Genesis keeps returning to the command, the desire, and the consequence, which suggests that the story was never mainly about food. Think about that for a moment. If the fruit itself were the central problem, why give us almost no information about it? Why name the tree according to knowledge rather than appearance? The object matters because of what the act means. Some people have described the tree as a test. Others say it represented moral discernment. Others argue it symbolized humanity claiming independence from God, and this is where things get interesting. Before the serpent ever appears, Adam and Eve already have everything they need. Food, purpose, companionship, a relationship with God. Nothing appears to be missing, yet the serpent does not tempt them with hunger, survival, or wealth. Instead, he introduces an idea. What if God is withholding something from you? And this is where the story gets strange. Because the first sin may not have begun when Eve reached for the fruit. It may have begun moments earlier. The moment God's character became suspect. The moment a boundary started to look like deprivation. The moment trust started to look naive. Suddenly, the story changes. The fruit becomes almost irrelevant. The real issue becomes trust. Can the Creator be trusted, or is he keeping something better for himself? Notice how powerful that question is. The serpent does not begin by denying that God spoke. He changes what the command appears to mean. A boundary that could have represented care is reframed as deprivation. A warning is made to look like control. Trust begins to look naive, while disobedience begins to look like freedom. That shift happens before anyone touches the tree. The first rupture is not in their hands. It is in the way they begin to see God. And that may be the most important moment in the entire story. Because if there is no choice, can trust really exist? Imagine a world where Adam and Eve physically could not disobey. A world where rebellion was impossible. Would obedience mean anything? Would love mean anything? Would trust mean anything? And one common theological interpretation is that this is why the tree existed. Not as a trap, but as a genuine choice. A boundary that made freedom visible. Without a boundary, Adam and Eve could enjoy the garden. But there would be no concrete moment in which they could choose whether to trust the one who gave it to them. The tree gave that trust a shape. Do they accept that one limit inside a world of abundance? Or do they treat the limit as proof that something is being withheld? But there is an important distinction here. The tree did not create evil, and Genesis does not describe the fruit as a magical poison. The danger is tied to the command and to what eating represents. Taking what had not been given on the promise that humans could become their own final authority. And this is where the story stops feeling like ancient history. Because humanity is still wrestling with the same question. A boundary feels restrictive. Trust feels unnecessary. The forbidden thing becomes more attractive than everything already given, and freedom starts to look like taking authority for ourselves. The garden may be ancient, but the temptation feels surprisingly familiar. Who gets to decide what is good? Who gets to define truth? Who gets the final authority? The Creator or the creation? But now another question opens. What exactly was the knowledge of good and evil? The phrase has been interpreted in several ways. Some readers understand it as moral discernment, the ability to judge between right and wrong. Others see it as mature or royal wisdom, the kind of judgment associated elsewhere in the Bible with rulers. Still others read good and evil as a way of describing the whole range of knowledge, from one extreme to the other. Genesis never pauses to define the phrase for us, but it does show us what happens next. The serpent promises that their eyes will be opened, and strangely, their eyes do open. But the first thing they discover is not limitless wisdom. It is their own nakedness. They cover themselves. They hide. They become afraid of the God whose presence had not frightened them before. That contrast matters. They reach for knowledge because it appears to offer elevation, but the immediate result is shame, fear, blame, and distance. The serpent's promise contains just enough truth to be convincing. Their eyes open. They gain something they did not have before. God later says that humanity has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. But the promise leaves out the cost. They do not become free in the way they imagined. They become suspicious of God, uncomfortable with themselves, divided from each other, and exiled from the place they were made to inhabit. They gain knowledge, but lose innocence. And they reach for autonomy, but discover alienation. And that is a much darker exchange than the fruit first appeared to offer. But there is another detail hidden in the story that many people overlook, because Eden did not contain just one special tree. It contained two, and the second tree may be just as important as the first. Most people focus entirely on the forbidden tree. But Genesis also mentions the tree of life. Before the choice, the garden is presented as a place of abundance. Only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is forbidden. After Adam and Eve eat, God prevents them from reaching the tree of life and living forever. Why? Apparently, the story was never just about gaining something. It was also about losing access to something. The choice changes humanity's relationship with God, with each other, and even with creation itself. Before the tree, they are naked without shame. After the tree, they hide. Before the tree, work belongs inside a garden of provision. After the tree, the ground becomes a place of struggle. Before the tree, God's presence is part of their world. After the tree, they flee from his voice. The world after the choice is not the world before it, and the tree of life makes the consequence even more striking. Humanity reaches for one kind of knowledge and loses the path to enduring life. The serpent presents the choice as an upgrade. Genesis presents it as an exchange. Knowledge for innocence, autonomy for intimacy, a promise of more at the cost of everything they already had. Which brings us back to the original question. Why did God put the forbidden tree in Eden? The honest answer is that Genesis never gives a single sentence explanation. The text never says, God planted the tree because, instead, readers are left to examine the shape of the story. One of the most common interpretations is that the tree existed because trust requires freedom, love requires choice, and obedience means very little if disobedience is impossible. In that view, the tree was not a trap hidden in paradise. It was the place where humanity decided whether it would receive life and wisdom from God or seize the authority to define reality on its own. But perhaps the story is doing more than explaining one ancient decision. Perhaps it is showing us a pattern. A boundary looks unnecessary. Trust looks restrictive. The forbidden thing begins to appear more desirable than everything already given. And the possibility of defining life for ourselves feels like freedom. That pattern did not end in Eden. Maybe that is why the tree stands near the center of the garden, because the question it represents sits near the center of human life. Can the Creator be trusted when we do not understand the boundary? Or will we assume that freedom means taking the authority for ourselves? According to Genesis, Adam and Eve made their choice, and it changed everything. But here's the question the story quietly turns toward us. If you had been standing in Eden looking at that tree, would you really have made a different choice? Or is the uncomfortable point of the story that in one way or another, humanity keeps reaching for the same fruit? But what do you think? What's your answer to this question? The Bible is full of mysteries, and not all of them have simple answers. So what's a Bible question you've always wondered about? Leave it in the comments. It might become our next video.